Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of Intercultural Insiders. My name is John McGraw, and I help newcomers and expats connect across cultures to succeed in less time and pain. I am the founder of Hyaku Coaching, which is dedicated to helping you create your pathway to success in a new culture. The purpose of Intercultural Insiders is to share the stories of people with intercultural experiences. So if you're feeling isolated or lost, you can hear something from the guests' experiences that could help you, even if it's just a reminder that you're not alone. And it's, well, definitely spring weather today in Toronto. There's a thunderstorm going on outside, and it's Easter weekend is coming up. So, looking forward to spending some more time with family. And as you can see, back now at the usual location, left my brother's home, and back in the usual space with the bookcase. So, today is part two of the conversation with Risa Hinokuma, but I have a quick announcement to make about last week when I was a panel speaker on Cafe New Canadians. That was with the topic of winning strategies to attract a Canadian job offer. This is now available on the New Canadians YouTube channel. So you can, even though you weren't able to attend in live, you can see it and find out all sorts of great information. Fellow panelist Clark Glassford and I shared top job hunting do's and don'ts and how to convert applications into job offers. And as a new immigrant, when you watch, you'll also learn about the Canadian workplace, what employers seek in candidates, and how to communicate your value to them. We had a lot of great guests, great questions, I should say, from the audience. And we got into a lot of things, particularly about networking and how to prepare for job interviews. So it's worth going out of your way to watch this episode on the New Canadians YouTube channel to see that. So you can just follow the QR code here. Just click on that and see the episode and get all of that great information, even if you weren't able to attend. So today is, of course, as I mentioned, part two of the two-part interview with Risa Hinokuma. She is a reminder for those of you who missed part one. She's a senior manager in customer service for Evernote. She is from Japan, but currently based in Austin, Texas. So she talks about how native Japanese speakers, actually, both of us talk about that, how native Japanese speakers react to learners of Japanese, because I asked some questions about that as someone who has studied Japanese. She also gets into her experiences of managing across cultures and talks a fair bit about cultural adaptation and identity, because there was a bit of discussion about that related to someone I had had a conversation with before, and Risa gives a lot of great insights on that. So, as you know, this interview is pre-recorded, but Risa is going to be live in the chat so she can answer questions related to that. So feel free to ask questions and comment during the interview. And as I think Chie has already, Chie Schuler, good to see you there. So Chie, hello from Columbus, Ohio. So good to see you, Chie, who is also a past guest on Intercultural Insiders. So feel free to chime in the chat where you're visiting from, where you're dropping in from, comment and ask questions throughout the show. It always makes it an more interesting experience if you share your insights and your questions. And again, Risa will be available in the chat to answer questions and to comment throughout the interview as well. So looking forward to seeing all of that interaction. So without further wait, let's get into part two of the interview with Risa Hinokuma. It makes me think about experiences with being a Japanese language learner and speaking to a native Japanese speaker using Japanese. And one thing that many learners of Japanese, I think, find quite funny is even if they have just the absolute lowest, very basic Japanese, the comments that they get from many native Japanese always, oh, you're Japanese, oh, it's really good. Even if you use just say one word, but then when your Japanese ability is actually considered really good, you don't hear that anymore. So basically, you get those comments when your Japanese is really still developing and you've got a lot of errors. But once it's actually at a high level and you're doing it quite fluently, it's almost that kind of builds in maybe that expectation. And when it's lower level, it's meant as encouragement. Okay, keep going. Yeah, you're not there. But then once you're there, it's okay. We don't want to just say that to inflate the person's ego or something.
I don't think so. I think whenever people say that they are simply giving you a compliment, if I meet someone who speaks Japanese and then if that person's Japanese is good, I am simply like, oh, wow, it's great. But also like appreciative of you learning because Japanese is not necessarily an easy language, right? And then if you are speaking Japanese fluently, I guess they get used to it because I don't really hear like people are giving me a compliment and that's fine. But sometimes when I speak with someone who knows the culture, who knows the language very well. And then when they learn that I wasn't raised here and then I wasn't raised bilingual, that's when I get the compliment recently. I don't think there's anything like a negative that they don't give you a compliment. I think they like get used to it.
That makes sense. Let's get back into talking a little bit about your experiences as a manager. You've had some experience in Evernote. So what can you tell us about your managing experience there?
At the beginning, it was hard, but at this moment, I have several years of experience managing people, and I just like leading people, managing people. That became part of my personality. I know some people don't like managing, but I think that is a great opportunity. And then if there's an opportunity, I think people should take it.
What is it that you enjoy about managing people?
That's a good question. I never really thought through. I think it's because you are able to raise people. You are able to contribute to that person's growth. Because as a manager, you have to always guide, if they are very new to the role or whatever they're doing, you have to guide them, right? Hey, have you ever looked into this? You have to give them guidance. And then from there, you have to give feedback. And then you also have to listen to their feedback too, because it's a mutual thing. By giving them guidance and then coaching them, giving them feedback, you started building a relationship with them. And then they started growing. And then it's just really nice to see that people grow and people are able to contribute more. That's why I like being a manager.
So the coaching,
yeah. And there are times like you need to give negative feedback. In general, people don't want to do that. But as a manager, you need to do that. So there are times like I don't enjoy. But overall, I think you are contributing to grow someone. And then that gives you opportunity to grow too. So it's always, I think it's a win-win.
Before you mentioned that there's a bit of a mix of the types of people that you're managing.
Yeah, so I manage people in the States, but I also manage people in the other country. So there are differences whenever I give feedback, and the way we communicate is different too. The tone can be different because in English it's more, hey, hi, but then like in Japanese, you have to change that. When it comes to giving feedback, the way I approach might be different. I think it really depends on the situation. The one thing I always care about is that I'm empathetic and I always assume a positive intent. Let's say they make a mistake and I need to give feedback. I always try to listen to their perspective first. And then from there, we can talk about why it happened. And then from there, we think about what we could have done and then what we can do next time. So I think that the way I might approach might be different, like how I start the conversation might be different. But I always try to make sure that I listen to them first. And then from their perspective, I try to understand why that happened. And then from there, we talk through and then find the solution together.
Listening to
yes.
to the others, and just having a discussion with them and getting their side of things and partnering with them, really.
They are partners. Yes, I might be their boss, but if I lose them, it really affects my work. So they are my partners. I never really see them like, oh, because they're lower, nothing like that. I never do that. They're my partners. My job is to take care of it and then listen to them. So I make sure that I always try to listen to them first.
In Canada, and I think also in the States, a common model for giving feedback was the sandwich technique.
You mean like being positive and negative and positive?
I'm wondering if that's something that you ever use or would use, or if it's something that you would use with some people. Or
I think I would use it, but depending on the situation, sometimes you have to be very direct. For example, if I request someone to do something by this day, and then if that person doesn't do that, then I have to say, hey, I requested you to get this done. So where is it? And in that context, you don't have to do a sandwich. But do you think sandwich is effective? Because I'm not sure. Because something you want to point out can be lost.
I don't think it's necessarily the most effective way. I think it is common in Canada and the States simply because there's been a tendency to be careful about being direct when it comes to negative feedback, but it isn't necessarily the most effective way to give feedback because depending on the person, they may not pick up on it. And particularly, I think people who are coming from different cultures where that's not common, they won't necessarily hear that negative feedback. Actually, I've done talks for newcomers to Canada about Canadian etiquette and expectations. And I mentioned a little bit about that simply because, not saying that's a model that they should follow, but just to be aware that if you have a manager, they may use that on you. And you need to listen for that. If you're hearing them giving compliments, you need to listen for that meat, that bit in the middle.
I'm glad that you mentioned that to the person because I think they're definitely a different way to give it feedback. I'm sure you have heard high context and then low context culture. So yeah, definitely. But from manager perspective, you have to be able to have a tough conversation with the employee. You have to be honest with the employee and then share that feedback. But the way you have to approach it is that you have to be very empathetic. You have to put yourself in their shoes and then decide and then approach it, right? As a manager, you have to be honest, but the way you have to approach it is being empathetic and being kind.
There's a necessity to have those tough conversations, but to approach them with empathy.
You have to have empathy. I think like even if you're not a manager, I think working with people, you always have to be very empathetic.
You've mentioned that you manage Americans and also people from other countries. I don't know if you've had experience with managing other Japanese, but if you've had that experience, when you switch languages, do you find that the way that you communicate with them, outside of obviously the language and the vocabulary itself, do you find that the way that you manage changes in any way?
I think my tone definitely changes, right? Because in America, it's more, hey, how are you? Sometimes you have to be like very bubbly. And then I can't just bring the same spirit when I speak Japanese. So I have to tone down a bit. I change the tone a bit and then try to be more polite rather than being friendly. I'm not doing that on purpose. I'm just used to it. But I think I'd switch.
It's a switch, but it's not something that you consciously think about. It just happens.
Not anymore. I think at the beginning, I was probably thinking about it a lot, but nowadays, I just don't do that.
And having those experiences where you are managing and able to switch like that, what's something that you've taken away from developing that ability?
I was actually managing the team in Japan first, and then I started managing people here. So I think I had to adjust myself a bit. When I started managing people here, I had to consciously change the way I approach to have a conversation, to give feedback. And so I think what I learned is that even if you are switching the way you approach, the foundation, like I said earlier, it's empathy. Hey, you have to be empathetic. You have to be supportive. You have to be their cheerleader, right? Because the way I share them might change depending on who I'm talking to. But as a manager, you are accountable to grow those people, coach them. So you have to be always available if they need you. Just being supportive, being empathetic, and just be present because They are people, they are my partners. That's something I learned.
Even though some of the methods you might use in terms of communicating might be different, the foundation, as you said, is constant. One other thing I'm curious is that sometimes there are concerns for people who are coming into a new culture that, oh, I have to change the way I do things or the way I am to fit into the culture. I see this sometimes with newcomers to Canada. They feel like, oh, okay, all that stuff that I have from my home country, I have to put that away and I have to completely change to become like someone who was born and raised in Canada, for example. Have you ever felt that way?
Something I learned a long time ago. I noticed that because I was not nice to people, I noticed that, oh, I don't have any friends now. But then when I noticed that, I changed my mindset. And then I tried to be nice to people. I think I changed my personality. This is like when I was in high school. After I moved to the States, I noticed that because in the States, being nice, being kind, being friendly is something that, liked here, right? And that's because of their culture here. So I think nowadays, I always try to be nice to people, bubbly. My personality is very bubbly, but I think that's something I naturally built because of the experience from high school, and then because I came to the States, and then now I'm a manager, and then I think that personality actually landed me to this job. Because if you are grumpy, if you're mean, especially when it comes to customer support, you can't lead people. You have to be able to lead people, you have to be likable. People needs to be comfortable reach out to you. And then now, when I think about my personality, it's interesting. There are times that I noticed that I have to change the way I am, right? Because I manage people, sometimes I have to give a feedback, negative feedback and stuff. So I have to be tough. I have to be resilient, right? What I do every day, I think it's just built my personality, and then that's my identity now. And then from, I guess, a cultural perspective, it's been a long time since I moved to the States. So the way I was in Japan, it's completely different from the way I am now. But I think the foundation is probably the same.
You've grown based on your experiences and the job that you do. I'm getting a sense that you're true to yourself as who you are.
Yeah. And when I think about my nationality, I don't really see myself, because I'm Japanese or because I'm American, because I've been in the States for a long time. I don't really see myself like that. I just see myself just like Risa. I'm very fortunate that I was able to have cultural experience in Japan and in the States. Yes, my passport is Japanese, but I'm also understanding the American culture. I consider myself a bicultural person.
I had an interview with another young Japanese woman who, when she was in high school, she spent a year actually in Canada. And then she went back to Japan and she moved to the States quite recently. And she mentioned that she was struggling with her identity because she wasn't sure if she was American or if she was Japanese. People who are at that stage, what kind of advice would you possibly have to them?
It's a great question. Does it matter that you are Japanese or American or whatever? Does it matter? I think the most important thing is that you try to adapt to a new culture, and then you have a struggle. And of course you have a struggle because you are coming from a different culture, but you are trying to adapt. You are making that effort. That's amazing, because some people don't like to adapt. And even if they move to a different country, they try to keep their stuff, and then they don't try to make friends from other culture. And then they just try to be in their shell, right? And I'm not judging that person, but you struggling, meaning that you are making efforts. And you should just acknowledge that, and then you should embrace that. You might be going through a hard time, but that's a part of the process. Just embrace that process, because eventually when you get to five-year mark, I'm not sure, I think it's depends on the person. 5-year mark or 3-year mark or whatever the milestone they hit, it's gonna be better. It's just a process, and I can't imagine going through the same thing again, because it was really hard on me. But if I didn't go through that, I'm not the way I am today. So yeah, I think people should embrace that experience, because not many people are able to go through that, have that experience in more than one country. So I think people should embrace that.
Excellent advice. What's a question I haven't asked you that you'd like me to ask, or that you'd like to
Um,
answer?
this person who is struggling adapting to a new culture, don't give up. That's what I'm gonna say. Eventually, things gonna be better. Maybe connect with someone who is going through a similar experience and share that experience with a person. That might be helpful. Because I have a friend who came to the States and then she's my best friend. And then like I talked to her about what happened to me and stuff. And then like she can relate to me. And then whenever you are going in a different culture, getting feedback or getting input with someone who can relate to you, I think means a lot. So my suggestion is to explore and then meet people who can relate to you and share feedback. Because I think the most important thing is that you're not alone. For example, like in Canada, right? There are so many people who immigrated to Canada from different countries, right?
Yeah.
And then it's not easy. Moving to another country is not easy. It's like a really tough experience, challenging. And you're not the only one who is going through that experience. So share that experience to feel accepted and then to feel acknowledged. I think probably finding someone who can relate to you is probably a good idea.
Thank you very much for coming on here. You had a lot to share about all of your experiences coming to the States and adapting there and growing into the person that you are today based on all of your experiences. And I think that's a great model for a lot of people who are earlier on in their journeys. So thank you so much for sharing all of this valuable stuff.
Thank you for letting me share my experience. And I hope whatever I shared today will be helpful for some people.
And that was part 2 of that conversation with Lisa. And again, a lot of great insights that she shared about her own experiences. Again, a number of, just wanted to highlight a number of the comments that came up during that conversation. Quite interesting from Anam, who mentioned, as a newcomer, that he feels so strongly about that idea about differences in communication. I think in the sense that he was a bit too direct, and unfortunately that led to some challenges in the past. But as I mentioned, I think that again, learning that's part of the process. So you're able to learn from it and adapt to different situations. And the fact is that you have that comfort with communicating directly, and also you'll learn the ability to adjust to be able to be indirect. So in some ways, you're going to have an advantage over someone who's just born and raised in Canada and hasn't had experiences with other cultures. And I think that's the one advantage of being able to adapt to different situations and bring in the different insights, different perspectives as well, which is something that Canada really needs with all of the newcomers and immigrants and international students who are coming here. So thank you for bringing that in, for mentioning that, Anam. And another comment, of course, from Chie. One of my favorite mottos is kindness is free. Yes, and again, that essentially that difference, I think that importance that was also mentioned earlier, that I think GM also mentioned earlier, to assume positive intent, going along with what Lisa had also mentioned as well in the interview, that it's easy to judge, and it's quite natural to judge, because I think we are, as humans, we're hardwired to make quick judgments, because when we go back into the past, as when we had to worry about being eaten by saber-toothed tigers, or eating poisonous plants, sometimes making those quick judgments were ways of ensuring survival. But with society being more nuanced, and with the workplaces, we don't have those immediate survival concerns anymore. A lot of times those snap judgments that we make are not necessarily so helpful. So it is important to assume positive intent, and then you can learn more from that and develop relationships. It's really getting into that mindset of assuming positive intent. Although it may not seem natural at first, I think in the long run brings up a lot of benefits, a lot of dividends as well. So Very, very great insights there that were mentioned. And yeah, even as Anna mentioned as well, the idea of being able to adapt somewhat, so you're already on the way there to that. It's not going to be perfect immediately, but you can get there. And another quick comment from Risa: I always try to be extra sweet when I know it would be helpful to building a better relationship. Extremely important. Okay, and then yet another comment from Lisa, adding on to the comment mentioned about pastry, and I think this was, yeah, previously. It's like pastry. American cake is a lot sweeter compared to Japanese cake. You need to adjust sugar level depending on the audience. That's a really good analogy, a good way to put it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, you can again think of it that way. How much sweetness is involved? It's like a recipe, right? And the tastes are going to be different depending on what people are used to, right? I remember when I first arrived in Japan and I was on the train from Narita. And I ordered green tea, just one of the, oyocha bottles. And I was shocked when I drank it because here, whenever I bought green tea, it was always sweetened. So the fact that it wasn't sweetened really shocked me, and I couldn't finish it at time. Now, of course, after having lived there for several years and drinking it, I'm very much the other way. For me, having sweetened green tea seems kind of unusual, and I prefer to have it just natural, that flavor. But yeah, getting that exposure to different things, different tastes, you can develop the tastes and possibly develop an appreciation for both, and being able to adjust that sweetness depending on your audience. Great analogy there, Lisa. All right. And so I think I can, with all of these great insights, I can also mention, actually, the one other comment I wanted to bring up was about the sandwich technique. And I did mention it briefly there, but it is something that is challenging for a lot of people who are not used to the sandwich technique to adjust to. And I do mention this, as I said in the interview. I do bring it up in workshops that I have done with newcomers who are looking for work in Canada, and also with entrepreneurs trying to connect with people and giving feedback. And one attendee of one workshop that I did, realized that a Canadian colleague had used the sandwich technique with her in an email. And her comment was, "Oh no, I've been sandwiched." So I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting and funny at the time. So getting on to next week, we're going to have another great guest. This time, someone who is from Canada, born and raised in Canada, but raised in bicultural circumstances. Catherine Sachi Kikuchi, who is a translator and language educator. She was born and raised in Toronto, but raised in a bicultural home with a Japanese father and Canadian mother. So I think, of course, the focus will be partially on her work that she does translating, and she's done a lot of valuable work with translating and language education. She's also the CEO of Kokoro Communications. But for that first half, first part, we'll be talking a lot about. I think this episode is going to be of particular interest to immigrants who are raising or planning to raise children in Canada, because she can speak to her experiences growing up in a bicultural environment in Canada, and that mixture of cultures that she had when she was growing up. We also get into talking about her experiences working in Japan, and also the sense of her establishing her sense of identity in Canada and in Japan, and perhaps how that was a little bit different depending on the circumstances. So very excited to have her there. Oh yes, and yes, Chie Sachi-san. So it's good. It's a small world. People know each other here. So very excited to have her on the program starting next week. And until then, keep navigating your way between cultures towards your goals. So have a great long weekend for everyone who's celebrating Easter, and see you next week.